Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Luttrell, and I'm here today to talk to you about net neutrality. So for the last 5 years, I've worked for a major internet service provider. Some of that time I spent as a wireline technician, helping to install and repair the various mediums in which we provided internet service to our consumers. Because of that, I feel especially qualified to talk to you about net neutrality because I've seen both sides of the argument. The argument for net neutrality, generally from the consumer, and the argument against net neutrality, generally from the providers. I have to tell you that after looking at both sides, we need to do away with net neutrality and instead allow the internet to be operated freely. Because so many people use the internet every day, it's clear to see that net neutrality affects almost all of us. Any person that uses the internet is going to be affected by how net neutrality flows. Today I plan to share with you how net neutrality hurts the consumer, how it hurts the provider, and I'm going to try to really give you some examples of instances where providers have abused the non-net neutrality laws and where they haven't. So, a brief history of net neutrality. Jeremy Brooks from Ohio State University wrote an article in which he explained how it all kind of began. Back in 1936, President Roosevelt signed into law the Telecommunications Act of 1936. In this long law, there's a Title II heading. And what Title II was, is it made all phone providers common carriers. Now, essentially what that means is anybody who provided phone service had to treat all traffic the same way. It didn't matter if it was the richest man in the world or the opposite. All phone traffic was treated equally. And when the internet came into being years later, most internet services were classified as Title II services. So the internet began neutral. Then, in 2002, the FCC decided that any internet service provided over cable, like you had in the 90s probably, was an information service, and it was no longer held to these rules of net neutrality. That meant the provider could do whatever they wanted to with your internet service, throttle it, they could block you from going to certain sites, whatever it was. More recently, there have been some issues with the net neutrality on both sides of it. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, has cited multiple instances of ISPs abusing the non-net neutrality laws, the non-existence of them. One example they gave was Comcast was stopping some of their consumers from accessing a website called BitTorrent. Now, that sounds pretty bad, but when you break down exactly what happened, it's not. Let me explain it to you. BitTorrent is a peer-to-peer sharing website, which essentially means consumers share different data, different content over the website with each other. That doesn't sound that bad, but a lot of what BitTorrent is used for is pirating illegal content. Not always, but a decent chunk of it is. And this is all according to an article written by Ars Technica. So what Comcast decided to do was, rather than deal with the imminent fallout of the federal government stepping in and saying, hey, your customers are using your service to do illegal things, Comcast said, okay, no, we're not going to let them use this website. There's no way for us to know if they're using it legally or otherwise. And since it's reputably illegal, we're just going to say no. And to add to it, all of the customers were made aware of this when they started getting service from Comcast. Another example is when AT&T stopped the broadcast of a concert that they were sponsoring, and it was broadcast over the web. Now, the concert was stopped when a political conversation came up during the concert, and that was the belief many people held, is that AT&T had stopped this concert because of the political rhetoric that was being talked about during the concert. What had actually happened was, because it was sponsored by AT&T, a family company, and because it was being broadcast on a family-friendly website, the content was blocked because of the profane language that was done. To add to it even more, AT&T, the internet service provider, is not the one who blocked the content. It was the managers of the website in which it was being broadcast on. Now, not every situation is like this where the ISPs are in the right, but it happens often enough that we need to be aware of when ISPs do things correctly, but it's still made to look like they're abusing the lack of net neutrality laws. Now, the laws have gone back and forth. Sometimes we have a neutral internet, sometimes we don't. When we do have a neutral internet, for example, a lot of content can't be handled by internet service providers the way we'd like it to. Let me give you an example. When you're sending or receiving data over the internet, some of it is more robust and it requires more bandwidth, and some of it is not. When you use the internet to browse web pages, your internet usage shoots upward for a very short amount of time, then goes back to zero. When you're streaming a video, your internet usage skyrockets and then stays there the entire time you're watching the video. When you're on voice calls, your internet traffic is going up and down almost constantly. Similar to how a video would, but at a much lower level. Now, with all of this in mind, most ISPs implement what we call quality of service, where we send internet traffic over different paths depending on the type of traffic it is. We prioritize traffic that is heavy on bandwidth and latency, which is how quickly the traffic gets from end to end. And then traffic that is not dependent on latency or bandwidth as much, like web browsing, checking your email, we send those on the slower routes. And when I say slower, we're usually talking 10 to 20 milliseconds. And this can be backed up by another article by Ars Technica. So by removing the net neutrality laws, we're allowing ISPs to implement cheap, effective solutions to the massive amounts of internet traffic we have on a daily basis. The expensive solution is to make the internet pipe significantly larger, which is going to happen someday anyway. But the cost difference of doing it now versus doing it in 5 years, when that hardware is cheaper, is an astronomical difference. So the software needed to implement quality of service functions is significantly lower. But by signing net neutrality laws into law, we're preventing ISPs from doing this, which inevitably is going to cause them to have to increase prices on the consumer. The other side of that is smaller internet service providers, the more local, regional ones, will not be able to afford this massive influx of hardware requirements, the capital expenditures they would need. Now, another article written by Josh Stymie of Forbes talks about the precedent that net neutrality laws would set. Net neutrality laws, if they went into effect, would be governed by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, which would essentially monopolize control of the internet into the hands of the federal government. And again, this would prevent small businesses and even large businesses that provide internet services to be all controlled by the FCC, unlike when we have the free internet as we do now. To end it all, I'm not going to say that internet service providers don't abuse the lack of net neutrality laws sometimes. In fact, they definitely do. But by threatening the impending net neutrality all the time, we're not helping anything. In fact, if we do away with net neutrality laws, the free market is going to allow consumers to shift their service needs to providers that will be able to provide them the service they want. That's the best thing we can do, is not force the different providers to hinge on the laws that would be essentially monopolized by the federal government. But don't take my word for it. After this, I challenge you to go look it up for yourself. Look at both sides of the argument. Look at the consumer side, where it's we want a neutral internet, and then look at the business and some consumer side where it's we want a free internet. With that, thank you for taking the time to watch me today. Hope you all have a great week.